During we've been in our midweek services, got to the passages looking towards Advent. It's only about, how many weeks is it till Christmas? 5? Something like that. Yes. And we have this, Moses at the burning bush. I just want to talk to you and share with you in a very relaxed manner before we get to all the big themes of Christmas. Just something easy from this familiar passage. So, think desert. It says in the Hebrew, I gather, the sheep were going between the wilderness and the mountain. That is, over there is all sand, over there is all rock, and there is a modicum of scrub in between that the sheep are following. And Moses would be following them, and it would be very hot. One day, while Moses was taking care of the sheep and goats of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, he led the flock across the desert and came to Sinai, the holy mountain. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him as a flame coming from the middle of a bush. And Moses saw that the bush was on fire, but it was not burning up. This is strange, he thought. Why isn't the bush burning up? I will go closer and see. When the Lord saw that Moses was coming closer, he called to him from the middle of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he answered, Yes, here I am. God said, Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, because you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your descendants, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Moses covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have seen how cruelly my people are being treated in Egypt. I have heard them cry out to be rescued from their slave drivers. I know all about their sufferings, and so I have come down to rescue them from the Egyptians and to bring them out of Egypt to a spacious land, one which is rich and fertile, and in which the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites now live. I have indeed heard the cry of my people, and I see how the Egyptians are oppressing them. Now I am sending you to the king of Egypt so that you can lead my people out of his country. But Moses said to God, I am nobody. How can I go to the king and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? But God answered, I will be with you, and when you bring the people out of Egypt, you will worship me on this mountain. That will be the proof that I have sent you. But Moses replied, When I go to the Israelites and say to them, The God of your ancestors sent me to you, they will ask me, What is his name? So what can I tell them? God said, I am who I am. This is what you must say to them. The one who is called I am has sent me to you. Tell the Israelites that I, the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, have sent you to them. This is my name forever. This is what all future generations are going to call me. Go and gather the leaders of Israel together and tell them that I, the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to you. Tell them that I have come to them and have seen what the Egyptians are doing to them. And I have decided that I will bring them out of Egypt, where they are being treated cruelly, and will take them to a rich and a fertile land. I just think that if we just reflect on that very simple, profound passage, with this one man and these sheep, and this scrubby bit of hillside, and this burning bush, it's a really good way to get your thinking right about Christmas and the whole preparations for Christmas. We are here, we all know Christmas is not about inflatable plastic Father Christmases, we've done that. But it could be all about what it's always about. It could be about shepherds and wise men and the star and everything we'll have here in the nativity service, and it'll be another Christian Christmas. This is quite a useful passage to get your mindset right without too much stress at this time, I think, Because this passage gives us the narrative, or as we might say these days, the meta-narrative, which sets the scene for what Jesus does. If you look in Hebrews 3, it says, to paraphrase Hebrews 3, Moses did a great job, but Jesus did a much more important job. And so Moses as a man is called here to make a fresh start. Here's a man not in a good place. He's been brought up in the Egyptian court, and now he's looking after sheep because of the business of killing the Egyptian. He has a bad self-image. When God says to him, you can do it, he said, I am no one. That is a bad self-image. So he's not anywhere. He's drifting around a few smelly sheep. And God calls him, and at the end of the day, gives him a significant role in the history of humanity. There wouldn't be Israel without him, and there wouldn't be us. That's pretty good for a few sheep. And so that message of salvation to the individual, and then really, as all of you will know, this is the message of the Exodus, 600,000 plus Israelites stuck in Egypt building pyramids and having a terrible time. That great concept of taking from, it's the big picture. It's interesting that in the road to Emmaus, where the two disciples are skeptical about Jesus' resurrection, and we can empathize with them, can't we? It's no good just thinking we know better. They couldn't believe in the resurrection, could they? But Jesus then expounded all the scriptures to them, took them through the whole thing to explain what had happened in the resurrection. And we read there at the end of Luke, beginning with Moses and the prophets. Because in Moses, there's the beginning of redemption. The exodus of the old Israel out of Egypt towards the promised land. And in Jesus comes the redemption of mankind from a bad place to a far better place. I think it just makes us feel that's where we're going before we get lost in the nativity scenes. This is Easter as well, isn't it? And I think it's good because people like me, when we look at this passage, the obvious thing is to talk about Moses. And Moses is an interesting guy, isn't he? And there's lots to say about him. And, you can say things like, here is Moses, a great believer in God, on a holy mountain, the mountain of God, is surprised to meet God there. I think, gosh, it's like me sometimes in church. I come into the house of the Lord and I'm surprised to meet him. That's sort of, gosh, I was confronted with God. That's what you're supposed to do. So he's an interesting guy, isn't he? And he's not easily convinced, but when he is, he's very tenacious, and he sticks with it. But it's easy to think this is a story about Moses. And if we got it on the wrong foot, we're like that with the story about Christmas, aren't we? When we do the nativity play, who's in the story? The shepherds, the wise men, Mary, Joseph. The innkeeper, various hangers-on that we didn't have any places for in the story. So they're all up here, It's all people, really, apart from the odd angel looking slightly worried. And when we come to Christmas ourselves, so often we're told this is about discipleship. So are we going to be caring for the poor? Are we going to be inviting somebody to Christmas lunch? Are we going to be doing this? Are we going to be doing that? It's all good stuff. It's all about us. It's all about human beings. But this story is not really about Moses. And the Christmas story is really not about Mary and Joseph. And our story is not really about us. If we're going to do Christmas, we need to think about God. This is by God, about God. And Moses is elected to an important walk-on part, but only because God decides to choose. This is about God. And it sets the scene for Christmas being about God. That was a great sound. Do you see this? I didn't see it myself, but I saw it on the BBC News website about this problem with this bakery that produced this story, this thing with the nativity scene with the crib. And in the crib there was a sausage roll rather than Jesus. And there was a big hoo-ha about this. And perhaps it was a pork sausage and it was, I don't know. But anyway, I thought it was really very funny, actually. And I could have used it. I could have put, do you want Christmas to be like this? There must be more to it than a sausage roll. But, of course, some of our more pious brethren were very offended by this. But it's going to be about Jesus, isn't it? And that's what God does. And if we look at Jesus in this, Well, we look at God in the Old Testament and the divine act, if you like. It says, he sees and he listens and he decides. That God is totally informed about the Egyptians and all their problems and all their pain. He's well informed. So when it gets to us, we can say, anything you want to share with Jesus, he is already well informed. You don't have to bang on for a long period to tell him all the details. And he said, and I have heard their cries. So he's also listening as well as seeing. And that's important, isn't it? Because you can feel, well, he knows it all. Why does he want to hear it? But he wants to hear it from you. Because when the Israelites cry out, it's not just a matter of the facts. It's a relational thing. They are showing a degree of faith. Where do you turn in a storm? I cry out to thee, Lord. It's that I will turn to you. You know about the pyramids and not having any straw, and you know all about the being slaves. But we cry out to you, and God hears that. So although he is well informed about us, he likes to hear it. We cry out to him. And then what? Well, this has been going on for decades since the change of pharaohs. All the slavery, all the blood, sweat, and the tears. God is informed, God has heard their cries, and God has done absolutely nothing. That is hard. Because he says, and now I have decided to come and save them. This is sovereignty, isn't it? It's God's decision. I'd love him to be at my beck and call. Now, Lord, if not sooner. But he hears and he sees, and then he decides. There have been lots of people, holy people in the time just before the first Christmas, who've been crying out, waiting for the Messiah for decades, and their predecessors for centuries practically. But then the angel turns up and says, no, this is the time. We're going to do it now. 8 months starting now, you know. I have decided. Why now? Well, no. I know all the salient features. I know when Caesar's going to produce a census and a taxing. I know there will be no room in the inn, but we will do it now. You know? You hear that sometimes in your life. Okay, I've heard, I'm informed, but actually, we'll do it now. I'm reminded of the parable that Jesus tells about the unjust judge and the widow that went and whinged to him all the time, and she went and whinged and he didn't listen, and she went on whinging, and then in the end he listened. So it's a story about, perseverance in prayer, really. Just go on crying out. God is not that he doesn't listen. He's not here. It's not that he's not hearing. He's not aware. It's just that he has decided when he's going to do it, and it might not be now. This is not one of those old, the answer to your prayer is wait. It's not about that. This is a matter of sovereignty, that God does things. And then actually does it all, doesn't he? It is all about him. I mean, who does the plagues? God does that. Who does the Passover? God does that. Who gets the dry land through the Red Sea? God does that. Who is the pillar of smoke and fire? God does that. Who takes them up to Sinai and gives them the 10 Commandments and makes a covenant with them? God does that. And then you think Moses has got to walk on part here. And it's the angels and the virgin birth and the coming of Christ and the incarnation that is the big action at Christmas. And the innkeeper and the proverbial donkey have a definite walk-on part. That's to watch out for. This is about God. It's about what he's doing. And he does it in his sovereignty. And I suppose one of the great things about God's sovereignty is not only can he do these great things that you and I couldn't do in our salvation, is bringing you from here to there. This is going to need God. He's going to bring you through the water of baptism, not the Red Sea, to a new place, to the kingdom. That's the real. Let's do this. Let's do that this Christmas. That we are saved and brought and delivered. Nobody else is going to do that. No amount of nativity plays will do that. That's what we hear. And if I'm prepared to allow him to do new things in his time, in his way, as you can see in this story, because he is sovereign, he will do, as it says in the New Testament, far more than you could think or ask. Those Israelites in Egypt just wanted the slavery to stop. They just wanted to stop building pyramids. They just wanted something nicer. None of them imagined crossing the Red Sea on dry land. None of them imagine crossing the desert and going to Sinai and getting a new covenant with a new God. They haven't even thought of a promised land. That was his idea. They cried out for this and they got that. All those holy people like Anna and Zechariah who'd been crying out for God to send his Messiah, they'd been hoping that the Messiah would come and kick out the Romans and vindicate the Jewish people. What they got was Jesus, and they get God with us, Emmanuel, but they also get the cross and the salvation of the entire human race, including the Gentiles. They didn't expect that. So much more. If you're happy to go with sovereignty, then you will go with what God wanted. Why ask for a small Christmas present when there's a big one in the offing, you know? I think so. That open-endedness. I think it's stuff to reflect on there. And if you just wanted a final thought from that, it's interesting that it begins very Old Testament-y, doesn't it? That God is there in awesomeness. Fire, don't stand there. Come nearer without any shoes on, covers his face. All good stuff, all important. But at the end, he's already told him his name, which is an incredibly intimate thing. You didn't get God's name. He says, and it's a very intimate name, I am, and we're going to work together on this. In other words, he's not brought out of Egypt to go to the promised land. He's brought out of Egypt to come to God, to come to Sinai, to have a covenant. We'll meet here again, he says. And Jesus doesn't come just to bring them out of the Roman Empire. He comes to bring them to himself, which is salvation. So, my name is I am, ego eimi. It's exactly what Jesus says he is. I am. And so this Christmas, it's not just that Jesus comes to save us and bring us from one place to somewhere else. You may feel that, but in the somewhere else place, we meet him. Let's come from here to me rather than here to there. That there is a personal meeting here. Emmanuel, God with me. I think. So just reflect on that passage and have a look at it and just think to yourself, if Jesus is quoting this sort of thing on the Emmaus Road when he's wound the whole thing up with the resurrection, then that's not a bad place for us to start, is it? And read the first bit of Hebrews 3 and see how the links are there and get your thinking right so we're asking the right questions and we can get into Advent and think, the promise of redemption, what a great story that is. I want to be in on this.